The X-Zone radio and TV show is largely an opinion talk show. All opinions, comments, or statements of fact expressed by Rob McConnell's guests are strictly their own and are not to be construed as those of the X-Zone radio and TV show or in any manner endorsed by Rob McConnell, Relmar McConnell Media Company, Talkstar Radio Network, its affiliated stations, or employees.
All Hit Radio.
Welcome to the X Zone, a place where fact is fiction and fiction is reality. Now, here's your host, Rob McConnell.
My mind, Lord, what a tale my thoughts could tell. Just like an old-time movie about a ghost from a wishing well. In a castle dark or a fortress strong with chains upon my feet, you know that ghost is me. And I will never be set free as long as I'm a ghost you can't see.
Welcome back to the X Zone, everyone. My name is Rob McConnell. We're coming to you from our studios in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada, on the Talkstar Radio Network, the X Zone Broadcast Network, and our family of broadcast affiliates right across Canada, the United States, Central America, the Caribbean, South America, the Pacific Rim, Australia, Asia, India, Africa, and Europe. If you'd like to give us a call, worldwide toll-free, 1-800-610-7035. My email address is xzone@xzoneradiotv.com. On MSN Messenger, xzoneradiotv@hotmail.com. And our website, www.xzoneradiotv.com. My guest this hour is Dr. Nick Begich, and Nick is well known around the world for his many, many works on and research on mind effects. And I'd just like to read you something before we bring Nick on Exonation. This is from Wired magazine. The title of the article is Danger Room, What's Next in National Security? Pentagon Preps Soldier Telepathy Push. Forget the battlefield radios, forget the PDAs, or even infantry hand signals. When the soldiers of the future want to communicate, they'll read each other's minds. At least that's the hope of researchers at the Pentagon's Mad Science Division, DARPA. The agency's budget for the next fiscal year includes $4 million to start up a program called Silent Talk. The goal is to allow user-to-user communication on the battlefield without the use of vocalized speech through analysis of neural signals. That's on top of the $4 million the Army handed out last year to the University of California to investigate the potential for computer-mediated telepathy. Now, before being vocalized, speech exists as a word-specific neural signals in the mind. DARPA wants to develop technology that would detect these signals of pre-speech, analyze them, and then transmit the statement to an intended interlocutor. Now, DARPA plans to use EEG to read the brainwaves. It's a technique they're also testing in a project to devise mind-reading binoculars that alert soldiers to threats faster than the conscious mind can process them. Now, Dr. Nick Begich, our guest this hour, is well known for his work and research on mind effects, more of a sinister kind rather than life-enhancing. He has widely reported in these areas as an expert for many publications, government organizations, and private companies. He has been an expert witness for the European Parliament on these subjects and provides significant research contributions in this area. Now, although through the Lay Institute of Technologies, he organized a private meeting of top scientists in the area of mind effects in 2007. Nick has authored 5 books in 7 languages on technology and the impacts of change, heard on thousands of radio and television talk shows, as well as documentaries. He is a frequent commentator on new technologies, energy, politics, education, and the environment, And Nick, it's great having you back here in the X Zone. Hope all is well with you way up in Alaska.
It's great, and I appreciate being on with you and your audience again, and on this topic, which is drawing increased attention as time goes on.
Nick, you and I have to take a 2-minute commercial break, and when we come back, we're going to be talking about this. We're going to be talking, Exonation, about mind-brain enhancing effects of modern technology. Dr. Nick Begich is our special guest, Exonation. His website's www.earthpulse.com and www.layinstitute.org. Nick Begich and I will be back on the other side of this 2-minute commercial break as the X Zone continues from our studios in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. Once again, if you'd like to find out more about Dr. Nick Begich, visit his websites, www.earthpulse.com and www.layinstitute.org. My name is Rob McConnell, and this is the X Zone, coming to you live from our studios in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada, on the Talkstar Radio Network and the X Zone Broadcast Network.
Love, what a tale your thoughts could tell. Just like a paperback novel, the kind of drugstore sell. When you reach the part where the heartaches come.
We're playing those mind games together, pushing the barrier, planting seeds, playing the mind gorilla, catching the mantra, peace on earth. We all been playing those mind games forever.
Speaking about mind games, the military has been funding a handful of mind-tapping technologies recently, and already have monkeys capable of telepathic limb control. Telepathy may also have advantages beyond covert battlefield chatter. Last year, the National Research Council and the Defense Intelligence Agency released a report suggesting that neuroscience might also be useful to make the enemy obey our commands. The first step, though, may be getting a grunt to obey his officers remotely, transmitted thoughts. Dr. Nick Begich is our special guest, and Nick is the author of Controlling the Human Mind, Angels Don't Play This Harp, Earth Rising, The Revolution Toward 1,000 Years of Peace, and Earth Rising 2, The Betrayal of Science, Society, and the Soul. And some of Nick's DVDs include Technologies of the 21st Century, Mind Control, Brave New, World of Enhancing Human Performance, HARP, The Update, and Earth Changes, The Ripple Effect. His website, www.earthpulse.com. Nick, how did your research lead you into the direction of enhancing human brain performance?
Well, that's actually where my interest started. The idea of sort of the misuses of this technology were something that came later and became important enough to start writing about. But the idea of enhancing human brain performance using technologies to increase what we're capable of was always a fascinating area for me. And then, of course, stepping in, I think the place where people started to see my work come forward was during the HARP controversies back in the mid-'90s. And we started getting very concerned about sort of the direction in which general technologies were moving, sort of away from bullets and bombs and ordnance and more towards these more exotic weapons, the kind that eventually led to this subject, which is a sort of direct coupling and interpretation of a mind activity or mental activity.
Nick,
when you look at that...
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, when you look at that whole area, it's even starting to make mainstream media concerns, even back as far as 2002. The Economist had a cover story in the May 25th issue called Mind Control, and it was a short article just dealing with the ethics of this emerging science.
Nick, I thought of you during the Jamaican earthquake. There were a couple of reports where Different news agencies had even speculated that HARP may have been responsible for the Jamaican earthquake, or Haitian earthquake, I'm sorry.
The Haitian earthquake, yeah. We had seen some of those reports, and of course, it seems like every time there's a major event, somebody contacts us, or a number of people do. And in this case, and the reason for that is because geophysical manipulation, the idea of creating earthquakes, is technically possible. In fact, even Secretary of Defense William Cohen, we quoted him in the book Earth Rising, the Revolution. He said, and I quote, others are engaging even in an eco-type of terrorism whereby they can alter climates, set off earthquakes and volcanoes remotely through the use of electromagnetic waves, unquote. And that was April 28, 1997, so way before 9/11, way before the big concerns about international terrorism rising to the level they are today, and yet this type of technology was being attributed to terrorist states as far back as 2002. What we have said, and we continue to say, is this area is one that has not just been of interest to terrorists, but also to our own country. In fact, 60 other countries signed agreements, an international treaty back in the mid-1970s where we agreed not to do this kind of thing. That treaty was being discussed when Rumsfeld was still in his position, trying to get the U.S. to dump the treaty so that we could use these more exotic technologies.
Now, Nick, in the recent article in Wired magazine that I read a bit of early, bringing you onto the show, the military is once again advancing ideas in the area of electronic telepathy. What is DARPA doing about this subject right now?
Well, this is interesting. Is we had Ben Eastland, who was one of the inventors of the HARP system, and we had a closed conference in Dallas back in 2007, just before actually Ben passed away, and the issue of mind effects was the topic for that conference. We had talked to Ben. I personally had a long chat with him about this subject, and he had actually talked to the top guy at DARPA. I'm trying to remember his last name, Tony Tether, I think it was, but the head guy at DARPA, and he raised the issue of mind effects with him, and his statement to me, Ben Eastland's to me, was, no one's laughing at DARPA anymore. This is a very serious subject, and one that resources are beginning and have for a number of years flown into. The idea of being able to literally read a person's thoughts is being discussed even outside of DARPA circles. We're hearing discussions about that even being used for indicating stress levels of people passing through airports, passing through machines similar to what we see in the strip search machine or the metal detectors, but a new concept that really looks at the mind itself and the function of the brain to see what you might be thinking. And so it is moving in a lot of directions, and getting a fair amount of funding these days.
What is required to analyze the brain in real time to know what the person's thinking, Nick?
Well, it's computing power is the biggest thing. Being able to translate and interpret the signals at a distance, becomes a bit of an obstacle, although I think a lot of that technology has been evolved and developed. The idea of looking at complex brain function and making an analysis of that so you can sort of generalize across populations to see really what those brain signals mean and to try and translate them the same way that people translate language, but looking at the brain activity itself. So using EEGs or more sophisticated methods of brain imaging, being able to look in real time as a person's thinking at what they're thinking, that's sort of where the science is today. And computing power has been the biggest obstacle, and we're quickly overcoming that as our machines become faster and more capable. So I think we're there, at least in terms of gross emotional sense of a person. You can deduce pretty readily specific thoughts. We're getting better at it. We're getting to the point where we can actually, with our brains, control mechanical objects. That's the crude and early stages of what we're talking about today.
What about getting the enemy to obey our commands? Is that really possible?
Well, there's some technologies already that have some of that capability. The idea of using what are called silent subliminals. These are words below the level of conscious hearing. In fact, there's patents regarding this that we cite in the book Control.
Nick, are you there?
Yeah, I am. Was that
Okay.
on your end?
Yeah, I guess so. We just kind of lost you, but you're
Okay,
back with
well,
you're back
we're
with us
back.
now.
You got me okay?
Yeah, we've got you fine. We were talking. What we were saying. What you were saying was you were talking about the book and obeying, having the enemy obey our commands.
Right. This idea of being able to look at brain activity from a different perspective. Silent subliminals. There are patents that have been developed for this, where you can actually embed language on, say, radio music coming into an area. For instance, in the Iraqi war, in the first Iraqi conflict, Scottish media reported after the fact that we had actually done this. We had recorded signals on the regular broadcasting Muslim music and prayer into the country that actually stimulated fear, anxiety, this kind of feeling. And what we saw in that first Gulf conflict was, the fourth largest army collapse like they had been, kids on a playground fire drill the first time. And I think that's indicative of sort of the state of the technology, say a decade ago when that was used. Again, just affecting the emotional state, and any electromagnetic carrier can be used to create that effect. This includes radio, TV, any kind of energy transfer can carry a signal that creates these kinds of emotional disturbances. In fact, there was a great article in the U.S. Army Quarterly back in the late 90s that we quote extensively throughout our work that talked about this. And what they said essentially is any electromagnetic emanation capable of being sent through telephone lines, TV, radio networks, supply pipes, even incandescent lamps, the signal would manipulate the behavior of those in contact with that signal. And so this is more on the emotional level, affecting people's general state of being.
It seems that mind games, as John Lennon sang, is going to be more truth than fiction in the very near future, if not already.
Yeah, I think already. In fact, you go back to the research on this, and you can go back many, many decades, back to the early 1950s, and even before. Some of the very earliest work was done in the hypnotherapy labs of Harvard University in the 1920s and 30s by a guy named Estabrooks. He got some notoriety by recommending LSD treatments in psychology, in psychotherapy back in the 60s, about the same time the CIA was actively using LSD and other hallucinogenics in tests for, again, their mind effects, or mind control testing. And, a lot of that, when you go back to those days, people were thinking about mind control as sort of all the sinister aspects of controlling or manipulating people, getting you to do things that maybe you normally wouldn't do.
Right.
But I think there's another dimension to this, and we talk about it often these days, and it's the dimension that what they also discovered along the way was sort of what the anomalous capabilities of humans were, what these unusual characteristics that weren't well understood. In the early days, they used to call them extrasensory perceptions. Today, they call it anomalous human capacities. And so it depends on whose language you want to use, but I think the latter was just a little bit too controversial in the current frame. But this is the nature of it. And so when you see articles like DARPA playing around with mental telepathy, it's about that sort of sixth sense, that other capability that we might have that they're extremely interested in. And there were other researchers as far back as the 80s who had made some great progress in this area, again, sort of explaining those attributes of human beings that are otherwise unexplainable.
All right, let's talk more about that on the other side of this news break, Nick. Dr. Nick Begich is our special guest. www.earthpulse.com. That's earthpulse.com. And Nick and I will be back on the other side of this commercial break with the news as the X Zone continues right here from our studios in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada.
All Hit Radio.
Welcome to the X Zone, a place where fact is fiction and fiction is reality. Now, here's your host, Rob McConnell.
on the promises and songs of yesterday. And I've made up my mind. I ain't wasting no more time. Here I go again. Here I go again. Though I keep searching for an answer.
Welcome back, X Zone Nation. Our very special guest this hour is an old friend of the X Zone, Dr. Nick Begich. And Nick is the author of Controlling the Human Mind, Angels Don't Play This Harp, Earth Rising, The Revolution Toward 1,000 Years of Peace, Earth Rising 2, The Betrayal of Science, Society, and Soul. And some of Nick's DVDs include Technologies of the 21st Century, Mind Control, Brave New World, or Enhancing Human Performance, HARP, The Update, and Earth Changes, The Ripple Effect. Nick's website is www.earthpulse.com. Nick, the military apparently is working on mind-reading binoculars to be used for interpreting threats. Now, how might these work?
Well, it's the same general idea. They're looking at brain activity and then creating a sensitive enough instrument that will actually be able to read at a distance. The objective is, to find out again what your adversary is thinking. Initially, I think what they're going to be looking at primarily is just general emotional state, which I think would be fairly easy to figure out what that is on the battlefield. I mean, it's stress for sure. I mean, huge amounts of it. But being able to sort of look at activity and then again being able to interpret it, that's where this science is and where it's headed. And and it's not so much even so much about controlling, although that's always been a big part of it. The other aspect of it is, what happens when you awaken these unusual characteristics in people. And I think this was the greater concern of military and intelligence researchers. When they started to look at sort of anomalous people who have these unusual characteristics and what they can do, that became pretty interesting. The idea or the realization that every human being maybe has these capabilities latently, I think was one of the things they discovered along the way. And the way that you inhibit the ability to reach these higher states of awareness or these abilities is to keep people in a constant state of stress. Look around, and I think everyone can pretty much acknowledge that's the state that most people are in for a variety of reasons. But as long as you're in that condition and you look at an EEG, those instruments that measure brain activity, what you'll see is incoherent brain patterns when people are under stress, the kind of brain patterns that don't lend themselves to higher order thinking and certainly don't lend themselves to extra sensory perception. That requires a slowing of the mind and body, a very controlled, rhythmic, coherent kind of signal then emanates from the brain, which can be easily analyzed. In fact, you can even drive those mental states. You can create situations where you actually can create that sort of zone, that place where you're in your ideal state of mental performance. At the same time, the recognition of that and the recognition of disturbing people's ability to think clearly, rationally, that's what so much of the military emphasis is really about. It's the idea of knocking your enemy off their pedestal in a way where they can't even control sophisticated weaponry, even if they had it available to them.
You conducted a closed conference for the Lay Institute when you were working for them on mind effects. I understand ESP did come up as a topic in both the formal and informal sessions, Nick. What is going on here, and where is technology going to be taking us?
Well, this was interesting is, everyone in attendance pretty much felt that was a normal sort of thing. In fact, Rosalie Bertel made a presentation. She is a PhD in physics and mathematics, a brilliant person. Her sense of it was that this is really the next evolution of humans, that this capability will be more manifest in the next generation as really a coping mechanism. The fact that human beings are now trying to create sort of artificial systems, in reality, we're sort of mirroring our own. And the idea that humans have this sort of attribute, and hearing it among scientists, both formally and informally, was pretty impressive. The most impressive speaker in the conference was Alexander Kavarenin, the former head of the biophysics lab of the USSR Academy of Science, the most impressive on this specific topic. And what he concluded and what he presented was pretty phenomenal. He gave a mathematical basis or formula or a theoretical model for how these things occur. And Alex, he got his interest in all of this back when he was a teenager. He's now in his 60s. When he was watching the demonstration of the paranormal in the former Soviet Union, that caught his interest. And with a guy with an IQ that just goes literally right off the charts, he dedicated his life to sort of figuring that out. And as a consequence, he developed a number of papers in the last couple of years that attempt to give a theoretical model. And the importance of that is that model becomes useful for engineers and the transition to engineering, which actually create mechanisms that can accomplish the things that he developed theoretically. The interesting part of his model is the root of the mathematics, which he reran the numbers a number of times just because they baffled him and yet made sense to him. And what it was the final summation of the number turned out to be a mathematical formula that's referred to as the golden mean. Sort of the essence of this sort of attribute of human beings boils down to the same mathematics that shows up in all of the great structures of the world. It shows up in most living organisms in one form or another. Very interesting that it would boil down to a mathematical principle that's been understood to be a little bit esoteric and at the same time not so esoteric, more scientific over the millennium, actually.
Nick, when we're looking at all these advances, if I can use that word, in warfare, why isn't it then just possible for warring nations to do everything electronically and just bypass the soldiers?
Well, I think on some levels we're going to start to see more of that. We're going to see more of a covert kind of war where we can disturb a nation's mental functioning. I mean, think about this as a practical matter, the kind of havoc that could be wrought with that. In fact, there was an article in Technology Horizon, which was produced by the Research Lab for the Air Force back in June of 2004, where they talked about exactly this, what they call controlled effects, being able to manipulate the operators or the human participants in conflicts in such a way where they wouldn't even be able to know it. I mean, they couldn't even distinguish that they were being literally affected. And this is again where the direction of war changes from one of bullets and bombs to one of gamesmanship in terms of how to manipulate people and events. And when you start to look at some of the geophysical manipulation that we just alluded to in the last segment, those same kinds of things where you can literally create geophysical events that can be explained away as natural, and yet there are many countries in the world that are working and have developed technologies in this very same area.
If the governments of the world are working on methods to control the enemy, let's say they master it, what would stop them from using these very techniques on the citizens?
Absolutely nothing. In fact, the former Secretary of the Air Force suggested that all weapons that would be classified as non-lethal, which these fit into, actually be tested on Americans first before they're deployed in battlefields. That raised a lot of questions, and he's no longer serving in that capacity in the last couple of years. But the point is, they do experiment on Americans. In fact, Secretary of Energy O'Leary during the Clinton administration acknowledged 500,000 American victims of human experiments that included everything from mind control to injecting black Americans with syphilis in the Southeast over a 40-year period. And out of 500,000 that they admit to, virtually nobody has ever been held accountable for those crimes against Americans. And the beat goes on. I mean, there's actually a protocol within the Navy that was approved in 2006. It's posted on our website under mind effects, and it's the rules for sort of human experiments. And on page 9, you'll see the words mind control experiments that have to be approved by the Undersecretary of the Navy. Those experiments continue to go on, and the permissions to conduct them continue to go on. RFPs, requests for proposals by the military, continue to be let. The most recent one that I looked at closed in September 2009. So the work in this area is not slowed at all. In fact, if anything, it's accelerated as we gain greater understandings within the neurosciences areas.
Nick, what about the issue of stimulating the brain for accelerated learning? How might electronic telepathy play into this in the future?
Well, this, I think, is very important because, as these techniques develop, one of the things that shows up, again, in military planning literature that eventually gets applied in the private sector is this idea of literally downloading information into the human brain. In other words, being able to move information in such a rapid rate to imprint memory that you could do some pretty phenomenal things. The problem with this is you don't filter it out. The conscious mind does the filtering to dump knowledge or dump information straight into the subconscious and then make it accessible. You bypass the subconscious mind. When you think about that in the context of compulsory education in most organized countries of the world, the idea of who controls the curriculum then takes on whole new meaning and much greater societal significance. So as we gain understanding, the use of this technology for learning and accelerated learning comes into play, and how we use it and who determines what goes in is extremely important. Already there's technologies for sort of enhancing the mind in such a way that it's more receptive to information, imprints it more readily, and there's a lot of good technologies about it. But you're in control. Yeah. You're in control of the knowledge that you feed the brain as opposed to some governmental entity determining what that is and then deciding what's best for all of us in terms of basic and general knowledge.
Now, you've mentioned a few positive potentials for this research, Nick, but what non-drug therapies have been developed for ADD, ADHD, brain training, stroke and brain injury recovery, and how does that all work?
Well, this is really, I think, some fascinating areas of the research, and now we have many methods of biofeedback for brain enhancement. We also have some things that have been developed to create a binaural beat, where actually sound comes in such a way through the ears through a set of headsets that it creates a beat frequency where the brain then either speeds up or slows down. And when you take attention deficit disordered children, oftentimes they tend to be hyperactive and their brains won't slow enough so they can focus their attention. And so techniques have been developed to actually train children to control their brain waves actively. And they do this in a number of different ways with different kinds of games that actually in real time monitor brain activity. And as soon as kids hit this sort of ideal zone for learning, they get feedback. It might be a bouncing ball or a sound signal. But these techniques are actually being used extremely effectively. In the Minneapolis School District, there was an experiment for a charter school for a couple of years, and 80% of the children that had been previously on psychoactive drugs to either speed them up or slow them down, they were able to get rid of their pharmaceuticals and actually learn how to moderate their brain activity using these tools, and then eventually without them, so that over a period of time, usually a couple of months, they could abandon the tools and immediately get to that ideal state of learning, even faster than most what we call normal people. In other words, they learned not only to overcome their disability, but actually learned how to control the mind in a way that made them more capable than their peers.
The future of these technologies, Nick, are certainly going to create synthetic and enhanced senses of taste, touch, sound, sight, and touch, as I said. Enhanced artificial sensors are not so far off. How are these technologies coming together, and what benefits can you see in the future?
Well, I think, again, as we learn more about the mind, traumatic brain injuries, which we're seeing, a lot of them with our returning veterans from both conflicts. We hear about the casualties in terms of death numbers, but traumatic brain injury is probably one of the biggest casualties of the war, tens of thousands, perhaps even more than that, being impacted by that. So learning sort of how to reroute brain activity, how to synthesize certain things, that becomes pretty valuable and important. And so as we learn about the brain, we learn how to sort of reconstruct that which may have been damaged. In fact, this science is going to go a very long way in the future. Our ability to grow brain cells, to grow neurons, to connect those brain cells has already been done at the Salk Institute. Taking those brain cells and neural connections and connecting them to electronic substrates has already been done.
Mm-hmm.
The idea of literally recreating components of the brain that have been damaged, that's where the science is headed. And I think in those respects, there's some great things that can come of it. And I think the balancing act is, in terms of the life sciences and military technologies, often things get suppressed for military purposes that really belong to wider user groups, people that really could benefit immediately by the release of technology. And unfortunately, we see a lot of that suppressed in the course of time. I don't think this technology will be any different, except to say that these days technology is much flatter.
Nick, you and I have to take our break. Please stand by. Nick Begich is our special guest. EarthPulse.com. We'll be back on the other side of this break. Don't go away.
On my way to better things, I found myself some wings. Distant roads are calling me. Da. No time for a summer friend. No time for the love you send. Seasons change and so did I. You need not wonder why. You need not wonder why. There's no time left for you. No time left for you.
And welcome back, everyone. I'd like to take this opportunity of thanking all our guests tonight. David Paul Doyle and I discussed the voice of God in hour number 1. Dan Green and I talked in hour number 2. Ed Johnson and I talked in hour number 3. And to be honest with you, I don't know what the hell he was talking about. But anyway, we had a talk, I guess. We tried to communicate, and then we played X-1 in the second half of that hour. And my guest this hour is our good friend, Dr. Nick Begich. Now, if you'd like to get a hold of Nick, he's got a couple of great websites, Exonation, earthpulse.com and layinstitute.org. And once again, Dr. Nick's books include Controlling the Human Mind, Angels Don't Play This Harp, Earth Rising, The Revolution Towards 1,000 Years of Peace, and Earth Rising 2, The Betrayal of Science, Society, and Soul. Nick, what do you think the future holds as we discover these attributes to our human potential, or of our human potential?
I think we are going to go through a really interesting period. Those that are fortunate enough to live through this period of history, I think, are going to see humans capable of the previously unexplainable. I think the next 10 years, 15 years, we're going to see these kinds of capabilities more readily demonstrated, understood, and the mechanisms behind them finally figured out. And here's what I really look forward to. And speaking maybe a little bit in a non-scientific way, but I believe humans are much more than we recognize. I think these capabilities are latent within all of us. The things that have been reported as telepathy, telekinesis, the idea of moving things with the mind, out-of-body experiences, which might be a lot of different kinds of experiences. But the bottom line is, humans, we are about to stretch, a stretch that perhaps we need for our very survival in this millennium. Certainly, the technologies that we are evolving are mirroring our own capabilities in many respects, and at the end of the day, I think we're going to find very gifted and empowered humans capable of recognizing what we are, who we are, and then acting accordingly. I think there's great things happening there. In fact, I think it is the counterpunch to the things that we see around the world today that we find so disagreeable.
Nick, as always, time just flies by whenever you're with us. I want to thank you so much, Nick, for joining us and for the great work that you do. Let our listeners know once again how they can contact you, Nick, and find out more about you and where they can find your books.
Sure. Our books are all over the place in terms of Amazon and all over the web, but do check out Earth Pulse, EARTHPULSE, earthpulse.com, and that's our site. There's a lot of good information there. A lot of it is free. Of course, pick up a book when you're done with it. Send it to your congressman, send it to your senator. Maybe we can wake up some of those folks that are still asleep at the switch.
Nick, take care of yourself, my good friend. Always great talking to you, and I look forward to the next time you and I meet here in the X Zone.
Thanks for having me.
Always a pleasure, Nick. www.earthpulse.com. Well, that's it for tonight, everyone. I'll be back tomorrow night at 10 o'clock. Thanks very much for allowing us to be part of your day and your night. And always remember to keep your eyes to the sky and your heart to the light. Good night, everyone.
Closing